Hi everyone, welcome to What Anna Makes. Today we're going to be making these awesome face masks. Right now we have a shortage and so we might as well make our own. So the first thing we're going to do is take the pattern pieces and cut them out. I have 2 pieces right here. Note the direction of the grain line. My grain line is going left and right, so I'm going to line that arrow up so they match. If you're looking for this pattern, it is available for free, and you just have to look into the description box of this video and you'll find it. Print it out and you'll be able to follow right along with me. Note how I am using tracing paper for this pattern. I wanted to be able to see through the paper and see the villain's face because I wanted to center it just right. I actually use this with all of my patterns. It's just easy to store and easy to trace through on the patterns too. But I especially liked it for this one because I'd be able to see where the villains are, where their face is, and line it up. Now you might have noticed that I only cut one, I guess, side of the mask. Technically you need 2, but the reason I didn't just fold the fabric in half is because I wanted to strategically place the pattern over the faces. So if you do it like this, you're going to want to flip the pattern piece upside down. If you don't do that, then you're going to have the pattern facing the wrong way on one side of your mask. So just don't forget to do that and you'll be okay. Now, if you fold your fabric in half because it doesn't really matter, which way the fabric is, then you don't even have to worry about that. Next, you're going to move on to the second piece of the pattern, this little rectangle. Note the grain line on the pattern piece and the grain line on your fabric. Make sure it matches up. Go ahead and cut 2 of those out. Now you're finished cutting the outside layer of your mask and the binding. Next, we're going to cut the lining. Some people even like to add a 3rd layer just for extra filtration. If you feel more comfortable doing that, great, do it. Just remember, make sure it's a breathable fabric. Also, don't spray waterproof chemicals on it because it's going to be right where you're it's going to go straight into your airways. So just be careful with that. And like I was saying, you do have to cut the lining. This is my lining. It is flannel and I folded the fabric in half, so I only have to make 1 cut and it's going to yield 2 pieces. Now with the final pieces of my fabric cut out, I'm going to flip them over if I didn't do so already, and I'm going to make sure that the right sides are facing each other for both the lining and the front of the mask. And now that we have the right sides facing each other, we're going to go ahead and sew them together. So this is the front of my mask with the villains. I'm using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. We're sewing the curve of the mask together at this point. That's the only stitch you want to do. So this part can be hard for some because of the curve. It's a little tricky. Just take it slow, guide your fabric, and you should be fine. Also, this is a reminder, just in case you forgot, don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end so that it stays in place. What I did next was I got my lining and just kind of like shoved it in, right behind the front of the first piece of fabric that I was using, and I just continue to sew. Again, only sewing the curve, which is basically the front of the masks. So you only want to sew right there, but I just threw in the lining and yep, don't forget to backstitch. Now, just for a more professional look, what you're going to want to do is press the seam open for the lining. I'll do that in the next step when I'm over at my ironing board. But for now, we're going to take the front of the mask and we're going to get the seam and push it to one side because we're going to sew it down basically. So make sure the right side of your fabric is facing up right now so you can see where you're going, and you're going to want to take the seam, put it on your right or your left side, whichever you prefer. Make sure it stays in place. And then you're going to want to sew right next to where your first stitch is and try to do a straight line, and it just really looks more professional with that added line. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You can skip that step. I just liked it and I thought it kind of added some definition to it. And while I was doing this, I found that if you get the fabric, instead of it going down towards the table, if you kind of put it going up towards your face, it was easier to control. And I don't know, I was able to sew the line straighter because of that, but that was just some advice. Maybe it'll work for you. Alrighty, and now that I've kind of cut off the loose strands of string, I'm going to put the mask inside out again. I'm going to get some scissors and I'm going to kind of thin it out. You always want to do this on curves so that it's not bulky and it doesn't look funny. If you have a pair of shearing scissors, that's even easier. You just cut it up and you're done. With this, I kind of had to go snip, 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 turn it, and snip, snip, snip again. All right, and now I'm going to press open that seam like I was talking about earlier. It was kind of a pain in the butt, so I found it easier if you kind of ironed into it and then flip it over and then iron into the other side. Eventually, I just flipped the whole thing inside out and tried my best, but I think because it was flannel, it just, it didn't press as well as regular cotton would have. All right, so now we have the binding, and basically I folded it in half, kind of just pressed it with my hand and I can see the crease. I opened it and then I folded the edge into that crease that I just made, and then I pressed it. Flip it over, fold the other side into the middle and press, and then you fold it in half one more time and press it, and you do it for both of them. All right, and now we're gonna go back to our sewing machine. We're going to get the lining and the front fabric of our masks, and we're gonna pin them together and sew them. Just make sure when you do this that the right sides of the fabric are facing each other, and you'll be good. Alrighty, so don't forget to backstitch when you start this one. Backstitch at the beginning, backstitch at the end. You're going to have the 1 inch seam allowance. And right now what I'm doing is the top of the mask, it is curved, so you might have to go a little slow again just to make sure that you get a nice clean line. The bottom is actually a lot more easier, it's not as curved. And again, just don't forget to backstitch. Once again, you're going to want to just clean up all of the loose strings, and then because the top of the mask had that curve, you want to cut it and thin it out. All right, and now I'm flipping the fabric inside out, and by doing so, I'm able to see the right sides of the fabric. I'm gonna push the seams out so that I can press them now. Now take the iron and press those stubborn seams. This is probably my least favorite thing to do. Okay, and so we're gonna take the binding now, and we're gonna get the raw edge of it and line it up with the raw edge of the face mask. The right sides, again, are gonna be facing each other. So the front of the mask and then the front of the binding, the right sides are facing each other. Make sure you leave about a 1/2 inch above the mask and below it of binding, because we're going to wrap the binding around to the back. All right, so now that both bindings are sewed onto the side of the mask, we're going to clip the ears of the binding so there's less bulk when you fold it down. If you feel like there's too much on top, you can trim a little bit off. Again, we only need about 1/2 inch on both sides of the mask. Okay, and now we're going to look at the back of the mask, so the lining, and then we're gonna fold over that binding. You're gonna fold over the edge first, and then you're going to, I guess like the top or the bottom edge, you know, the side that was kind of sticking out that we left, the 1/2 inch, fold it over, and then you fold the binding basically how we pressed it. So you'll hold it once in and then once in again, and it's going to look, yeah, basically how we pressed it. And then you just clip it or pin it, and you do that to all 4 sides, and then we're going to sew it. So sometimes with these folded edges and it being all lumpy, it can kind of get stuck. And so if you have something that you can just use to kind of guide it, to push it gently forward, use those little orange scissors to just kind of give it a little nudge. You don't want to force fabric because it can mess up the timing on your machine if you're tugging on it, you know. So one thing I wanted to mention was the elastic. I used 1/4 inch wide elastic and it fit perfectly in there. If you're going to use something wider, I would recommend making the binding wider also so that it will fit. Or if you use the round elastic, that would also work really well. All right, next we're going to pull the elastic through the little tunnel that we just made with the binding. I'm using this cool tool that I got. Honestly, I don't know what it's called, but if you don't have it, you can just use a bobby pin. With the bobby pin, you just slip the elastic through and then through the little like nodule on it, and then you pull it through. So it's essentially the same thing. And then one mistake I made when I was doing this is I pulled the elastic through the wrong side initially. So make sure, if you're looking at the picture right now and the elastic came out of the bottom right-hand side, you're gonna wanna make sure that the elastic goes into the top, or the top right-hand side, and then comes out through the left. So if you're looking at the video, you would understand. If you're just looking at your mask, that might be confusing. So take a look at the video, make sure you're following along. Then you just have to knot the elastic and trim it, and then you can kind of move it around and you can actually fit it into the little binding tunnel that we made earlier. And there you have it, we finished, and we have a nice, beautiful face mask. Thank you so much for following along with me on my first sew along, I guess you would call it. Here's a couple of pictures of the finished product. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I will get back to you. Thank you. I'll see you next time.